Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to Unboxed Lunch. Before we get started, please know that this event is being recorded. I'm Jenny Williams, Associate Director of the Archives of American Art at the Smithsonian Institution. We're thrilled that you're joining us for lunch. The Archives of American Art's Gilbert and Ann Kinney New York collector Jacob Proctor will soon join us to feature the newly acquired papers of Cleopatra's. A few housekeeping items, though. At any time during the webinar, you can submit your questions in the Q&A at the bottom of the control screen. Closed captioning is available. You can access captions by clicking the More button and then closed captions at the bottom side of the control panel. Now, I'd like to welcome and introduce Jacob. Hey, Jacob.
Hello, Jenny. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us. There we go. Yeah, so welcome. This is a collection that I'm very happy to have acquired. And so Cleopatra's was a great sort of experimental curatorial platform, exhibition space. They also published, did lots of events, sort of a little bit of everything, that operated in Brooklyn between 2008 and 2018, essentially the length of a 10-year lease on a commercial space. And I thought about this when for those of you who are regular visitors, a year or two ago, when we acquired the collection or the records of the space called Four Walls, which had been a really important space in Brooklyn, in artist-run space in the 90s, I started thinking, I was like, oh yeah, well, Cleopatra's is kind of like that for the, the sort of late 2000s and into the 2000 teens. And so I reached out. I knew all of the organizers, and I reached out and I just asked, what do you have? And so that's what we have. I should note also that because because of the dates, 2008 to 2018, this is the paper, this is the amount of the paper archive, but there's actually a really sizable born digital component that I'm not really able to show you today, but that researchers will eventually have access to as well. You can imagine that a lot of photographs, a lot of correspondence, just a lot of everything was created digitally and maybe printed out or maybe not. All the press releases, all the checklists, lots of back and forth about planning events and shows. But there's actually quite a lot here as well. So I thought I would pull out a few things. This, let me start with, this is the sort of Cleopatra's sign. The name of the space was a deli beforehand called Cleopatra's, and they just decided to keep the name, which I think is kind of wonderfully appropriate. And actually, I know that I see Erin Somerville, who is one of the founders, is on, so I may ask Erin for help if I don't know the answers to things. But anyway, this was in a kind of janky metal frame, and I took it out for preservation purposes. But so that's maybe the earliest thing in the collection. So they, as I said, it was founded in 2008, and it was all of the founders worked in sort of very serious commercial galleries, and they had, oh, Bridget's here too, great, or Bridget Finn at least. And they had essentially they wanted to make those kinds of decisions themselves for they were all kind of junior directors at sort of various Chelsea galleries, and so they started their space, and they started right off the bat with a pretty early on with a benefit, which is a sort of time-honored tradition. And this one the artist Jeanette Munt
$8? Is that the amount?
Yeah, $8. So it's not exactly like the MoMA gala, but it was and billed as a fun, and then the D is a fundraising event. But it's cool because we also have, this is the original collage for the poster, sort of like a printer's mechanical. It's funny, it also actually includes some corrections. There were some names that were misspelled, and maybe I don't know if they had to change the date or something. But anyway, this is very cool, just as an object. And then this is all like a handmade collage. So we've got, and this is a very unprocessed collection, like very unprocessed. So there's folders with, there's sort of notes and ideas for, I think this looks like a kind of brainstorming list for who might be involved in, I don't know whether this is for a group show or just artists that were of interest. There's sort of more kind of notes like this with people. There are various, I think eventually I'll get to know everybody's individual handwriting. Things like this is the for a Jimmy James Williams exhibition. Oh, this is cool. So this is describing this exhibition of Jimmy James Williams. And then I also noticed that we have in here, there's some great sort of ephemera from that show. So there's see if you can see this. There's some kind of mock-ups for invitation card. There's a sort of drawing. I don't know if everybody can see that. For sort of like, I guess they weren't really using SketchUp, but so it's a nice artist drawing of what his show was going to look like. And there's this this cool sort of accordion fold notebook that has this, I think I might be upside down, this long drawing in it. So very cool. There's lots of cool artifacts and kind of bits of sort of relics of past shows that are included. Another early show, which is kind of great to think about sort of right now, was that the artist at that point, not particularly well-known artist, Josh Klein, organized a screening of a documentary by the British documentarian Adam Curtis called The Century of the Self. And so there's kind of stuff here about, I guess this is, I don't know whether Josh made these kind of effects on his desktop or what have you, but then there's great, there are notes from this. I don't know there's a bunch of different handwriting. So I don't know whether these were like program notes of people watching or whether it was notes that were meant to introduce. But there's a lot of that. And then there's some great photos also of the event. So I like this one. Josh is known, among other things, for his sort of smoothies and drinks that are made of all kinds of crazy things and materials that no one would ever think about actually imbibing. But in this case, it looks like maybe he was actually making smoothies that were drinkable. So here he is introducing the program. There's Erin, Kate, Bridget, and Bridget. This is like, I think within the first couple of months of the space really even being open. There's an audience shot. That's Colby Chamberlain. Colby, I think, is also on this.
He
Who I
is.
think at that point was an editor at Triple Canopy or something like. So there's a lot of there's a lot of familiar, kind of familiar faces from today's art world. And I thought this was great because this is 2008. And Josh now, as many people probably know, has a mid-career survey show up at the Whitney 15 years later. So you can sort of get a sense just from that how kind of prescient and really on it the Cleopatra's was in terms of its program, like right off the bat, was really quite it's important. And there was a sense already at the time, I think, among a lot of people that this was something that was important, and it got a lot of traction quite quickly. There's some great photographs here. I'll switch back over to my meet me at camera 2. This is a project called CKTV, which was initiated first by an artist named Chris Rice at a venue called Santos Party House in Manhattan. And then Cleopatra's did a presentation. This is at Tandem Bar in Brooklyn. There's Ruba Katrib, who's a curator at PS1, Juliana Huxtable, and it was essentially artist karaoke videos. So it gives you already a kind of sense of that this is both art, but also a lot of fun and a lot of community building and community of artists and writers and curators. And there's some more crowd shots. This is what we used for the invitation. And then this project also sort of got some real legs and became, it was included in the Shanghai Biennial. Here's another, I don't know where these ones were taken, whether this was in Shanghai or at BAM, but there's some other photographs of another sort of performance of this piece. Sorry, they're all in kind of random orientation. And then it was presented at BAM, the Brooklyn Academy of Music, in their gallery. And it included shot videos from a huge number of artists, many of whom are quite sort of familiar names at this point, although they weren't always at that point. So please correct me if my memory is not serving me for some of these things, but there's what else? There's some funny, just like a lot of kind of random photographs. There's like this picture. This is Matthew Lutz-Kanoy and Kala Henkel and Max Pittigoff. I don't know whether this was taken in New York or in Berlin, because actually one thing that's interesting to note is that after a few years, Erin Somerville, one of the founders, moved to Berlin for a while and opened up a Cleopatra's in Berlin. And since all of these people are Americans but have been based in Berlin at that point, I'm not sure whether it was in New York or in Berlin. Here's Kevin Beasley. You can't really see it because of the light. Doing with some turntables. So there's a lot of there's like a lot of good other photographs as well. What else? Oh, one thing I thought was kind of interesting and sort of a little bit unusual was that there was this box of mini DV recordings, and I believe that they're all interviews with people with artist-run spaces, or kind of, if not artist-run, then like Cleopatra's, which were run by 4 curators as opposed to artists, but like little DIY spaces. And I think that there's also there's a hard drive, which perhaps I haven't gotten to look at it yet, but perhaps contains the files from these recordings. But so you have, and these are all over the country. So there's places in Detroit, there's places in Philadelphia, kind of all over the place, LA. So you have here also within this collection is like a little, I guess you could say like a little mini oral history of the state of kind of small artist-run independent spaces at some point. I don't know what year these recordings were made, but probably like around 2010, 12 or something, I would guess. I think 2012 is probably right. And there's also a DVD. We'll see what this is. Small Gallery Conference. So there's a lot of cool stuff like that. There's also there was a lot of collaboration with other sort of like-minded spaces or similarly minded spaces. this whole folder here is all documentation and material from a show at Cleopatra. This is a photograph that was organized by a space called Larry's in Berlin. And it was called Nonprofit State of Mind. So it's got, there's like a kind of, there's a handmade artist book. This is like hand taped together. So I can, oh, maybe I'll see if I can, there's my camera. This is like a perfect bound little zine artist book that they made. Here's the kind of press release manifesto description of the show. And then there's lots and lots of these kind of like manipulated, these are just printouts, but these were like installed and hung in the show. So there's a very, oh great, Bridget Finn just put up the link for what the tapes were originally from. It was a project organized by Vox Populi, which is a great long-running artist-run space in Philadelphia. So there's a whole folder of stuff about this this Larry's show, and I should also mention there are a lot of great rare publications, because among the many things that Cleopatra's did was they maintained like a kind of zine library. So there are a lot of we have a lot of those in the collection. You know, and these are like little zines published by artists, and you know, sort of very independently published and basically impossible to get at this point. There's also, you know, there's funny stuff, like there was, you know, because they were a non-commercial space, but you know, there was a moment around this time when a lot of non-commercial spaces started being invited to participate in things like art fairs. And so there was an art fair in 2011 called The Dependent, which of course was a play on the so-called the Independent Art Fair. And it was, I guess, in a kind of nod to and so here they had works by Polly Applebaum, Mary Helena Clark, Alex DeCord, Petrova Giberson, Christian Joy, and Annika Yee. So, you know, this is 2011, and now a lot of those people have gone on to a lot of acclaim in the years since then. But I love that and I went to this, I remember this very well. It was held in the Four Points by Sheraton Hotel, which is a very nondescript, I think is a charitable way of putting it, venue for an art fair. But it was, I think, a kind of reminder of the old Gramercy Hotel fair that eventually became the Armory Show. And I love that it's like sort of, you know, it's like a door tag, which is very clever.
That is. It'd be interesting to see the overlap with Polly Applebaum's papers that we have.
Yeah, one thing that was cool about Cleopatra is that, you know, although they showed a lot of, you know, a lot of sort of young artists or artists of the same generation as the curators, they also did a lot of projects with more established artists or like a little lesser known work by artists who had much larger careers. So artists like Polly Applebaum or, you know, Jessica Stockholder. I remember there was a show of drawings, I think, from the 80s or maybe the 90s. And Jessica's not that old. That, you know, was great. And that was, you know, it was very cool to see such established people also participating. You know, they also, Cleopatra's would get invited to curate projects at other spaces. So there's a folder in here somewhere from a project that they curated at PPOW Gallery, and there's some nice funny correspondence and sort of suggestions as they were planning that. And then in 2015, they curated the White Columns Annual, which was the 9th White Columns Annual. And then there's this funny thing which says, it's like a little bust of Nefertiti, and it says, given to Bridget Finn from Robert Longo on the equation, which is just a funny little, I'm curious what the what the story is behind that. What else? There's also this is a kind of folder of sort of press releases and documentation. this is a cool one. This is their they did a press release. They had this kind of archive of press releases about from other galleries and institutions about abstract painting. And they presented this, is it going to focus? Yes. As a kind of unpublished discussion of abstract painting over the past decade. And so I thought this was kind of great. And, you know, there's like, here's the sort of the list of all of the shows that they have press releases for in this presentation. So, you know, it's a very interesting and kind of clever way of thinking about how artistic discourse gets formed, and the kind of the press release as a vehicle both for, you know, the basics that you need to know about the show, for publicity, but also maybe as a kind of ongoing conversation. But that was a very smart and clever thing to do at the time. There's material for, oh yeah, here's the, here are the corrections that needed to be made to the original, to that poster I showed earlier. You know, this is a checklist for a Nancy Davidson show in 2012. There's another an event, I think. Here's the kind of mock-up for the pendant thing. There's a performance by Carrie Lauren, who's a Detroit artist. Kind of amazing. I haven't really weeded out the duplicates yet. Oh yeah, this is a project where Colby Chamberlain, if memory serves, it was all of Godard's, the trailers for all of Godard's films presented in one screening, I think, with notes.
Colby, feel free to chime in.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong about if my memory isn't so great. But you know, this is basically just like, this has a lot of descriptions of shows, checklists, all the kind of, you know, all the stuff that is really important for researchers in the future to be able to kind of reconstruct, you know, what happened and what was shown when and where. So there's like some, you know, there's really, this is, sorry, this is in a plastic folder. It's a little hard to see. But yeah, so lots of good stuff there. I don't know why this folder, Zach Kidnick did do a project, but this obviously very early on actually. But this folder seems to have been repurposed. Uh-oh. There we go. So I don't know if there are questions or if I should just keep going. There's a lot to, there's a lot of stuff to show.
Yeah, there's a lot of great stuff. Why don't you keep going, and then yeah, if anyone has questions.
Yeah. Oh, this is cool. This folder, this is another big thick folder. This is all material that had to do with a great show that they organized called Trade Secrets at a gallery called John Connolly Presents. And I'm gonna I feel like I'm not gonna do it justice in terms of the how it worked exactly, but basically there was like one work at a time on view, and then each day a new participant would come in, and then people's names were, yeah, here we go. There's were written like on a chalkboard, and of course all of these, well, we have, you know, our digital photographs, so these are printouts, but they'll researchers will have access to the originals. And each day someone would come in and replace one of the names and one of the objects in the show. So it was like over the course of the show, you never saw the same show twice. And so there's some correspondence in terms of how it's getting organized, pre-organizing. I forget what's in this. Is this a, oh yeah, this is I think this is a sales. This is the blank for the sale.
Jacob, I just wanted to note that Bridget Donahue did join us. So
Oh, great. So everybody's here. Excellent. So I think, as you can see, and then this project also then became a great little book. And so the book also has all of this material, but this is not a book that you can just like go to the bookstore and buy. So it's great that we have, we have a few copies of this actually.
We have 2 comments. Colby wrote back and said that we didn't screen all of Godar's trailers.
A bunch, yeah.
Yeah, a bunch of them.
Yeah, so a lot of these things are more complicated conceptually than sort of this format lends itself to, but it's very cool. So yeah, and then Bridget is saying that the Trade Secrets was based on the idea of a gift economy, and every day an artist brought a new work in and took one out for themselves to keep, and collectors could also do so. And so all of the various changes and permutations are documented in the book, and then of course also in all of the documentation that led up to it.
And then just a note from Abby Lloyd saying that they're a Cleopatra alum.
Oh yes, yeah, there are lots of great Cleopatra's alums. It is really it was the place to be. And there's some other things. This is they did a postcard. Maybe I'll switch my camera for this. I think this might be the last thing that we have time to look at. Another kind of, please focus, another fundraising effort, $2 a piece, that organized by Sylvain Mary and Michel Oder. And so there's just like, there's this huge stack of postcards, all designed by, by various artists. And they are actually postcards. You can sort of see you could actually send them. So this is also very, kind of a great little capsule of, a certain, a lot of artists at the time. So a big chunk of the art world participated in this project. So I think that this, in terms of starting to wrap up, I think this is a collection that, there's a lot of artists that came through, both in terms of participating in exhibitions or also organizing exhibitions, a lot of guest curators, a lot of events. So I think that, this will be a collection that offers a lot of different ways in for researchers in the future. So we're very happy to have it.
Yeah, and definitely. And thank you again to the team for joining us. We appreciate that and for donating the papers. Thank you, Jacob, and thank you everyone for joining. I hope that you enjoyed the program as much as I have. Take care and have a great afternoon.